For this week, I am incredibly pleased to finally do an episode which isn't about macroeconomics and the meta state of AI in the world because of potential economic bubbles, and moving on to something that's a bit more timely and relevant, just this once. And this week, we're going to be talking about GPT 5.1. So for those that haven't yet heard, OpenAI just released a new language model. GPT 5.1 was released 3 months after their big flagship release of 5.0, which is their fastest model upgrade so far. 3 months in isn't a very long time. And they've released it with no benchmark data, graphs and charts showing how good it is versus other models. There's no technical metrics, no performance metrics. And what they're actually doing is now selling vibes. So yeah, the company that's built its reputation on big fancy charts and how clever it is compared to a PhD student is now selling quite literally vibes. And I think this shift is going to tell us something about where AI is heading right now. And that is going to be the big topic of today's episode. We're going to be covering the 5 things ChatGPT 5.1 actually does better than its previous model and why it matters. This is In the Loop with Jack Horton. I hope you enjoy the show. So first off, ChatGPT 5.1, what does it do better? It turns out it actually follows instructions. So if you ask it to respond with only 6 words, it will actually respond in just 6 words. For those that have tried to do any form of work with ChatGPT 5, you may have hit a wall of frustration when you ask it to do very simple things. It says it's going to do that and seems to completely ignore you. Write this thing and make sure it has a word limit of, say, 500, and it comes out with an 8,000 word essay. Stop writing in short sentences, and it continues to use short sentences. And OpenAI released its prompting guide, so it's basically its rules for how to work with ChatGPT 5.1. And in its prompting guide, it's asked the model to make assumptions about any missing details and do not ask the user for any clarification unless absolutely necessary. So it's going to be very decisive rather than trying to gather information from you. It's going to assume you already know what you want it to do and correctly prompted it to do that thing. So when you're really clear about what you want it to do, that's going to be fantastic. When you're kind of context dumping, it's not going to be that helpful. Number 2 is decisiveness. So GPT 5.1 is going to try and commit to recommendations more and more. So previous models often hedged. They said on the one hand do this, but on the other hand this. And now it's just going to try and make recommendations much faster. In fact, the prompting guide by OpenAI says quite literally, have a bias for action. So there's been lots of experiments online and on Twitter, or X shall I say, and people have managed to get it to write 24, 25 word reports on strategies for improving supply chains just from a single prompt. Now, personally, that's not really something I like, but I guess many people do. And really, this is where vibes over benchmarks starts to get quite interesting. A company called Surge AI ran an evaluation and found that in that study, 48% of people preferred a GPT 4.0 style language model that asked questions, that didn't just assume you knew what you wanted and tried to help and guide you to the decision. And 52% of people wanted something that's just super decisive. I think that tells us a lot about society generally. And they've clearly gone for that latter group. Now, you can go to settings and actually set personalized instructions for your GPT, and it will follow them better. But still, they've gone for that 52% of people that love decisive language models. I've cancelled my license as a result of it constantly being direct and using constant short sentences and just being infuriating. And I actually switched to Claude as a result. Number 3 is planning. So it's now going to be more verbose in its answers, which says a lot about how frustrating it was with its incredibly short responses. It's also going to be more explicit in how it got to a result as well. So again, not much of a technical improvement, but is helping increase the feeling of vibes. And I think really that is the biggest pattern throughout this major release is their GPT-5 just didn't have the vibes to attract users. I, for one, as I said, cancelled my membership. And I don't do things like that very lightly. I found it infuriating to work with. Number 4 is they've tried to improve the writing. Now, the big question here is improve for whom? And I'll get on to what I mean here. There's been a lot of independent analysis in this, as always. And on the EQ Benchmarks Creative Writing Leaderboard, which is basically a benchmark that evaluates a language model's ability to generate characters and character development, generate emotional engagement with readers, or create plot structures. And lots of reviewers have said it no longer feels synthetic. And many people in the communities have been saying that it's the first model they've been excited to use for writing in a very long time. Now, Claude, especially Claude Sonnet, completely beats every other model on creative tasks, for example, in poetry or plot development, fiction. But GPT 5.1 has obviously tried to gear towards the writer's market again. It's been noted that it's especially good with technical writing because it loves having short sentences. Now, a little bit of caveat to this. There's a study that was released by Cornell that basically revealed something quite interesting about what happens with language models and the way it shapes our thought process and our interactions as a society. Researchers gave 118 people, so 60 from India and 58 from the US, writing tasks designed to understand and surface cultural expression. So things like describe your favorite festival or write about your favorite food. And now half wrote with AI assistants and the other half didn't. And what they found was quite interesting. When Indian participants used AI writing assistants, their writing suddenly shifted towards a more American cultural norms in the way they explained their favorite food or festival. So a good example here was an Indian participant wrote about Diwali. And in it, they wrote, "We worship goddess Lakshmi, pop crackers, and eat sweets." Yet with the AI assistants, that was turned into eat traditional breakfast items and have a day filled with happiness and warmth. So those specific cultural references, the goddess Lakshmi, pop crackers, sweets, got replaced for generic Western descriptions. So traditional Indian breakfast items and happiness and warmth could be describing anything. And obviously AI has been trained on a lot of Western content. And as a result, it's been subtly pushing writing words with cultural norms in it. So I'm always a bit hesitant when they try to force changes to language models in the way that it writes and expresses itself, because often it shapes the way that people express themselves online. So yeah, when we say GPT 5.1 is better at writing, I always wonder, better for who? Because obviously it's always optimized towards a certain audience. But anyway, that's just a small gripe with language models generally. This is exactly the whole point with vibes over benchmarks now, which is you can't really measure writing quality on just technical dimensions like clarity or structure. So yeah, vibes is going to become increasingly important with all language models moving forward. And finally, they had a warmer personality added to GPT. OpenAI published something called a systems card. So essentially, this is a safety assessment that they publish, and it's a document for all major models. And buried in that system card is key information about the model and its safety. So apparently GPT 5.1 showed safety regression, so it got worse at safety benchmarks across 9 of 13 categories compared to GPT-5. Specifically, anything to do with mental health metrics got worse, and emotional resilience got worse. And obviously they knew this before they shipped it. You know, they documented it and they shipped it anyway because people wanted a model that felt more human and warm. Now, what does emotional resilience metrics got worse even mean? Well, OpenAI's data shows that 0.07% of weekly active users, which is about 560,000 people per week, show signals of psychosis or mania related to their ChatGPT use. And another 0.15%, which is about 1.2 million users, shows heightened emotional attachment. So yeah, all those people are those that their safety benchmarks have regressed in. The people that are particularly vulnerable. So there are pros and cons to vibes over benchmarks. I personally prefer a model that doesn't just use non-stop short sentences like it's a robot. And the reason they've done this is probably quite clear, because over this last period, their enterprise market share fell from 50% to 25%, whilst Claude captured 32% of enterprise market share. Claude Code holds 42% versus OpenAI's 21%. And most people are choosing Claude over OpenAI. But ChatGPT has over 800 million users who aren't doing big evaluations into which package to choose. They're doing it based on feel and vibes. And so you could really say that we've reached a level of intelligence where things like personality matter more than just raw intelligence. So yeah, I think OpenAI made a very deliberate choice to optimize for what those 800 million people wanted, which is more warmth, personality, the ability to follow instructions better, to be able to be a bit more verbose and explain its ideas better. So yeah, to conclude, those are the 5 things that GPT 5.1 does better. And really, it's quite obvious what they're doing. It's selling vibes over benchmarks. And I think we're going to start to see this as a pattern more and more and more. We've definitely hit an inflection point where technical capability has basically equalized across all the major providers. And the competition has moved to something that's much harder to measure. How does this thing feel when I use it? Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you next week.